Clara Lawson expected a new beginning in Wyoming territory. Instead, she found rejection. The wealthy rancher refused to marry her when he saw her mute brother Timothy. Left stranded as winter approached, Clara faced starvation until a scarred ranch hand offered reluctant shelter. Neither Clara nor the reclusive Ethan Foster expected to find healing in each other's broken lives. Comment where you are tuning in from before we start this heartbreaking frontier tale. Clara Lawson clutched her brother's small hand as the stagecoach rumbled to a stop in Willow Creek, Wyoming. After weeks of travel from Boston, her back ached and her nerves frayed, but hope kept her posture straight as she stepped down onto frontier soil. Timothy, 12 years old and mute since birth, pressed against her skirts, wide eyes taking in the dusty main street with its weathered buildings. "Not much to look at, is it?" Clara whispered, forcing cheer into her voice. The late autumn wind bit through her thin coat, a reminder that winter approached these high plains with merciless speed. Timothy's fingers tightened around hers in silent response. Clara patted his head, then reached for their single trunk. 3 months of correspondence with Thomas Blackwood, a cattle rancher seeking a bride, had led to this moment. His letters promised security, respect, and a grand house with servants, a far cry from the cramped Boston apartment where they'd struggled since their parents' deaths. "Allow me, miss." The driver hoisted their trunk down. "The Willow Creek Hotel is just yonder. Mr. Blackwood said he'd meet you there." Clara pressed a coin into his palm. "Thank you for your kindness on the journey." The hotel lobby smelled of pine soap and tobacco. Clara approached the desk with practiced dignity despite her travel-stained dress. "Clara Lawson, Mr. Blackwood is expecting me." The clerk eyed Timothy with poorly disguised curiosity before directing them to a small parlor. They had barely settled when the door swung open. Thomas Blackwood cut an impressive figure in his tailored suit and polished boots. Tall and broad-shouldered with silver threading his dark hair, he carried himself with the confidence of wealth. "Miss Lawson." His smile displayed perfect teeth beneath a neatly trimmed mustache. "Welcome to Wyoming territory." Clara rose, extending her hand. "Mr. Blackwood, it's a pleasure to finally meet you." His warm greeting cooled noticeably when he noticed Timothy. "And who might this be?" "My brother Timothy." Clara drew the boy forward. "I mentioned him in my letters." Something flickered in Blackwood's eyes. "You mentioned family obligations, not a child." "Timothy is my family." Clara kept her voice steady. "Our parents died 3 years ago. I've cared for him since." Blackwood's jaw tightened. "I see. Perhaps we should discuss this privately." In a small side room, Blackwood's charming facade vanished. "This arrangement won't work, Miss Lawson." Clara blinked. "I don't understand. I need a wife to host dinners for business associates and manage my household, not someone burdened with a defective child." The cruelty of his words stole Clara's breath. "Timothy isn't defective. He's mute, not simple. It makes no difference." Blackwood withdrew a small purse. "Here's enough for return passage. We'll say there was a misunderstanding." Clara's fingers curled into fists. "You reject me because of my brother? I reject the complication. I was explicit about wanting an unburdened woman to build my dynasty. And I was explicit about my family obligations." Clara squared her shoulders. "Keep your money, Mr. Blackwood. I'd rather starve than marry a man with such a heart." She turned on her heel, dignity intact, until she closed the parlor door behind her. Then her hands began to shake. "We're staying, Timothy," she whispered, though panic clawed at her throat. Their funds would cover lodging for 2 weeks at most. The next days passed in growing desperation. Clara sought employment at the dressmakers, the school, and even the laundry. Each inquiry met with the same response once they saw Timothy trailing behind her. "We can't be responsible for a simple boy underfoot." "He's not simple," Clara would correct, warmth rising in her cheeks. "He's mute but understands everything." The explanations made no difference. Their money dwindled as October winds grew sharper. Outside the general store, Clara counted the coins in her purse while Timothy played with a stray dog in the dirt. 7 days of lodging left, perhaps less if they ate regular meals. "That Foster is an odd one," a woman's voice carried from inside the store. "Living out there all alone with those burns gives me the shivers." "Beggars can't be choosers," a man replied. "He needs help for winter and no one else will take the job." Clara's head snapped up. "A job? Can't blame folks for staying clear." Doctor turned ranch hand, something unnatural about that. Clara moved closer to the window, catching sight of a tall figure at the counter. His broad shoulders were hunched as if trying to appear smaller, his hat pulled low. When he turned, she glimpsed severe burn scars covering the right side of his face and neck before he adjusted his collar higher. The shopkeeper placed supplies on the counter. "No luck finding help then, Mr. Foster?" "I'll manage." His voice was deep but soft, as if unused to conversation. "Winter's coming early this year, too much for one man, even without those injuries slowing you." The scarred man, Foster, placed coins on the counter without reply and gathered his purchases. Clara made her decision in an instant. She collected Timothy and intercepted the man as he exited. "Mr. Foster, I understand you need help for the winter." Cold blue eyes assessed her from beneath his hat brim. "Not the kind you're offering." Heat rushed to Clara's cheeks. "I meant honest work for room and board. My brother and I are capable." No, he stepped around her, Clara persisted, following him to his wagon. I can cook, clean, mend, garden. Timothy is good with animals. Foster secured his supplies. I prefer solitude, and we prefer not to starve. Desperation made her bold. 2 weeks, if we don't earn our keep, we'll leave. Foster's gaze shifted to Timothy, who had approached his horse. The boy stood perfectly still, hand extended as the animal lowered its head to sniff him. Something flickered in Foster's expression. Your brother? Yes, Timothy. He's mute but hardworking and gentle. Foster watched as Timothy stroked the horse's nose, the animal nudging against him with unusual friendliness. 2 weeks, he finally said. Bring only what you need. I'll collect you at sunrise. Relief weakened Clara's knees. Thank you, Mr. Foster. Ethan, he corrected. Just Ethan. And don't thank me yet, Miss Lawson. Winter on the frontier breaks stronger people than you. As she watched him drive away, Clara wondered if she'd traded one form of desperation for another, but the alternative was worse. We'll be all right, she told Timothy that night as they packed their few belongings. We just need to survive until spring. Dawn revealed Ethan Foster waiting with his wagon as promised. The journey to his homestead took 3 hours across increasingly rugged terrain. The small ranch sat nestled against pine-covered hills, a main cabin, barn, and smaller outbuilding arranged neatly around a central yard. You and the boy take the bunkhouse, Ethan said, indicating the outbuilding. I rise at dawn, expect the same of you. The bunkhouse contained 2 narrow beds, a small stove, and little else. It was clean but Spartan. I keep to myself, Ethan continued. Suggest you do the same, kitchens for cooking only, my quarters are private. That night, as the first snowflakes fell outside their window, Clara held Timothy close beneath their shared blankets. We made it, she whispered. We have shelter. But as the wind rose to a howl and shadows deepened around them, Clara wondered what kind of man lived so removed from others, and what secrets the scarred former doctor kept behind his cold blue eyes. Clara woke before dawn, disoriented until she remembered their desperate arrangement. Timothy slept beside her, his breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. She slipped from beneath the blankets, wincing as her bare feet met the icy floor. The small stove had gone cold hours ago outside, smoke already rose from the main cabin's chimney. Clara hurried to dress, then gently roused Timothy. By the time they crossed the yard, pale light edged the eastern horizon. Ethan Foster sat at a rough-hewn table with coffee and cornbread before him. He acknowledged their entrance with a curt nod. There's food, he said, indicating the stove. Chores start after eating. Clara helped Timothy with his breakfast before taking her own. The coffee was strong and bitter, but the warmth was welcome. What would you have us do first? She asked when they finished. Ethan assigned Clara to the kitchen garden, harvesting the last root vegetables before the ground froze completely, while Timothy would help with livestock. Clara started to protest sending her brother alone, but Ethan cut her off. Animals don't care if he speaks or not, he said. They understand different languages. Clara watched nervously from the garden as Ethan demonstrated feeding routines to Timothy. To her surprise, her brother followed instructions perfectly, seemingly untroubled by Ethan's scarred appearance. Days established a rhythm. Clara took charge of cooking and indoor work, finding satisfaction in bringing order to the neglected cabin. Timothy helped with the animals, returning each evening tired but animated, gesturing about his day. The 2-week deadline approached, then passed without mention. Clara chose not to remind Ethan, and he volunteered nothing. Then came the first real crisis. An early snowstorm cleared unexpectedly, leaving a brilliant blue sky that tempted Timothy to explore. Clara, busy with laundry, noticed his absence only when the sky darkened suddenly with another approaching storm. Timothy's missing, she told Ethan, panic rising in her voice. Ethan's expression hardened as he grabbed his coat. How long? 2 hours, perhaps. Clara reached for her own coat. I'm coming with you. You'll slow me down. He took a rifle from above the door. Stay here, keep the fire going and water boiling. Before she could argue, he was gone, tracking into the gathering darkness. The storm descended with vicious speed. Clara paced the cabin, stoking the fire and heating water as instructed. Every minute stretched agonizingly. 3 hours later, the door burst open. Ethan carried Timothy, the boy's face pale against his shoulder. Frostbite, Ethan said tersely, laying Timothy on the table. Not severe if we act quickly. Clara watched in amazement as Ethan's hands moved with practiced precision. He examined Timothy's extremities, prepared herbal compresses, and administered some medicine from a locked cabinet. You're a doctor, Clara said when Timothy finally slept, safely tucked in Ethan's bed near the fire. A real doctor, Ethan's jaw tightened. I studied medicine once. Why do you hide it? I'm not hiding anything, he said sharply. I chose a different life. Clara sensed the wall rising between them. Thank you for saving him. Something softened briefly in his expression. The boy has spirit. Be more careful with him. The incident changed things between them. Ethan began teaching Timothy to signal with his hands, creating a simple language that expanded daily. Clara watched their interactions with mixed emotions, gratitude for Timothy's happiness and something more complex when she observed Ethan's patient instruction. Their isolation intensified when winter settled fully across the land. The next trip to town proved difficult, with Clara facing renewed hostility. "The good women of Willow Creek are concerned for your welfare," the shopkeeper's wife said with false sweetness as Clara selected flour. "Living unchaperoned with that disfigured man," Clara stiffened. "Mr. Foster has been nothing but proper. We have separate quarters. And that poor simple brother of yours," the woman continued. "People wonder what happens out there, so isolated." Clara slammed the flour sack onto the counter. "Timothy is thriving, which is more than I can say for the kindness in this town." As she turned to leave, she nearly collided with Thomas Blackwood, Miss Lawson. His smile didn't reach his eyes. "I heard rumors you remained in our little community, living with the burn victim, I'm told." "Mr. Foster has shown more Christian charity than most," Clara replied coldly. Thomas leaned closer. "If you find your situation uncomfortable, my offer stands, modified, of course, given your circumstances." Clara left without responding, but the encounter disturbed her. Back at the ranch, she noticed how Ethan avoided her gaze during dinner. "There's talk in town," she finally said. "About us. There's always talk." Ethan kept his focus on his plate. "Doesn't matter. It matters if it affects you." They were unpleasant. Ethan's knuckles whitened around his fork. "People find it easy to judge what they fear." That night, Clara discovered a leather journal fallen behind a shelf while cleaning. The name Dr. Ethan Foster was embossed on its cover. She knew she should return it unread, but curiosity overcame her scruples. The journal revealed a different Ethan, educated, passionate about medicine, dedicated to his patients in Chicago. The entry stopped abruptly 3 years earlier. A violent blizzard struck the following week, confining them to the cabin for 4 days. On the third night, with Timothy asleep and the wind howling like lost souls, Clara found the courage to ask. "What happened in Chicago?" Ethan stared into the fire. "You read my journal." "I found it by accident," she admitted. "But yes, I read it. You were respected, successful." The silence stretched so long she thought he wouldn't answer. "I had a wife, Rebecca, a daughter, Hannah." His voice emerged low and raw. "I was called to a patient, a difficult birth. While I was gone, our house caught fire." Clara's hand flew to her mouth. "Oh, Ethan. By the time I returned, the roof had collapsed. I tried to reach them." His hand unconsciously touched the scarred side of his face. "A neighbor pulled me out before I could get to the bedroom where they were sleeping." The pieces fell into place: his isolation, his abandonment of medicine, his scarred body and spirit. "You blame yourself," she whispered. "I was meant to protect them." His eyes reflected firelight and deeper flames of memory. "I failed." Clara moved to sit beside him, her own life's sorrow seeming smaller beside his burden. "You couldn't have known." "I was saving another woman's child while mine burned," he said flatly. "There's no absolution for that." Something broke open between them that night, a door neither had meant to unlock. Clara shared her own struggles, the consumption that took her parents, the years of poverty trying to keep Timothy from institutions that would crush his spirit, the desperate decision to become a mail-order bride. As winter deepened around the small ranch, other things thawed. Ethan began joining them for evening meals instead of eating quickly and retreating. He showed Timothy how to whittle simple figures, their hands working together in companionable silence. Clara found herself watching Ethan when he wasn't looking, his careful movements, the rare smile that transformed his face when Timothy accomplished some new task. Christmas approached with little acknowledgement until Clara began storing flour and dried fruit. When Ethan questioned her, she announced her intention to observe the holiday. "Timothy and I always celebrate, even simply," she said with a firmness that brooked no argument. On Christmas Eve, Clara presented them with small gifts: knitted mittens for Timothy and a new scarf for Ethan, crafted secretly from unraveled yarn. Timothy offered a crudely carved horse figure to Clara and a polished stone to Ethan. Ethan seemed startled by the exchange but disappeared briefly, returning with a book of illustrated fables for Timothy and for Clara a delicate silver thimble. "It was my mother's," he said gruffly when she gasped at the gift. "Sitting unused in my trunk." That night, with Timothy asleep and pine boughs scenting the warm cabin, Clara found herself standing close to Ethan by the fire. Something unspoken hummed in the air between them. His hand rose hesitantly to touch her cheek. "Clara, I never expected." Timothy's cry from the small bedroom interrupted the moment. The boy thrashed in the grip of a nightmare, calming only when Clara gathered him close. When she returned to the main room, Ethan had retreated behind his walls again, the moment lost. January brought bitter cold that kept them largely confined to the cabin. Clara established a routine of lessons for Timothy each morning, teaching him to write and calculate using a slate Ethan unearthed from a trunk. In the afternoons, Ethan continued Timothy's education in hand signals, expanding their vocabulary daily. Clara observed these lessons with quiet joy, noting how Timothy blossomed under Ethan's patient guidance. The boy who had once hidden from strangers now moved confidently around the ranch, communicating his needs through gestures that grew increasingly sophisticated. One evening, Clara found Ethan watching Timothy sleep, an unguarded tenderness in his expression. "He reminds me of her sometimes," Ethan said softly. Hannah had that same determination. Clara stood beside him, their shoulders nearly touching. How old was she? 7 when I lost her. She would have been 10 now. I think she would be proud of her father, Clara said gently. Ethan's hand found hers in the shadows, his calloused fingers entwining with her smaller ones. The gesture, so simple yet intimate, spoke volumes that neither dared put into words. February brought temporary thaws that allowed Ethan to check fences, while Clara ventured outside to assess the kitchen garden's prospects for spring. Timothy worked with a special project in the barn, a wounded colt that had been delivered by a neighboring rancher seeking Ethan's help. The colt had suffered a leg injury that most ranchers would have addressed with a bullet, but Ethan had fashioned a splint and taught Timothy to change the dressings daily. The boy's gentle manner seemed to calm the frightened animal. He has a gift, Ethan told Clara one evening as they watched Timothy sleep. Better with animals than most men I've known. Perhaps because he listens differently, Clara suggested. When words aren't your language, you notice things others miss. Ethan nodded, his gaze lingering on her face. Like how your eyes crinkle before you smile, even when you're trying not to. The observation caught Clara off guard. You notice that? I notice everything about you, Clara. The admission hung between them, too honest to dismiss, too fragile to acknowledge fully. Clara felt warmth rise in her cheeks as Ethan's eyes dropped to her lips. A log shifted in the fire, breaking the moment. Ethan cleared his throat and rose. It's late. Good night, Clara. February surrendered to March, bringing longer days and the first tentative signs of spring. The snow retreated gradually, revealing muddy patches around the buildings. With the changing season came new uncertainties. What will you do when the weather breaks fully? Ethan asked one evening as they sat by the fire, Clara's hands stilled on her mending. I hadn't thought that far ahead. You should, Ethan said, his tone carefully neutral. Spring brings options that winter denies. Before Clara could respond, a knock at the door startled them both. Few visitors braved the muddy roads this early in the season. The caller was Jacob Miller, owner of the neighboring ranch and father to the young wife Ethan had helped through a difficult birth years before in Chicago. Thought you should know Foster, Miller said after accepting coffee. Blackwood's back from his business in Denver, been asking questions about your place. Ethan's expression hardened. What kind of questions? Boundary lines, water rights. Miller glanced at Clara. And about your house guests. After Miller departed, Ethan paced the small cabin. Blackwood has wanted this land since I bought it. The creek that runs through makes it valuable. Why would he suddenly pursue it now? Clara asked. Ethan's gaze was pointed. Perhaps he's found leverage he didn't have before. The implication stung. You think I would help him take your home? I think Blackwood rarely loses what he sets his mind to acquire. 2 days later, Clara encountered Thomas Blackwood in town while purchasing seeds for the spring garden. He intercepted her outside the general store, immaculately dressed as always. Miss Lawson, he greeted her with exaggerated courtesy. You're looking well, country air agrees with you. Clara tightened her grip on her packages. What do you want, Mr. Blackwood? To apologize for our misunderstanding. His smile didn't reach his cold eyes. I've had time to reconsider my position regarding your brother. Perhaps I was hasty. Clara's suspicion mounted. Indeed. I've recently acquired property near Denver, Thomas continued. A fine house with excellent schools nearby, including facilities for children with special needs. Timothy doesn't need special facilities, Clara replied sharply. He's thriving where we are. Thomas's expression hardened slightly. Living in a one-room cabin with a disfigured recluse, hardly appropriate for a woman of your background, Clara. People talk. I don't care what people say. Perhaps you should. Thomas lowered his voice. Foster has secrets that might concern you. Were you aware of them? I know about Chicago, Clara said firmly. If you're attempting to manipulate me, you're wasting your time. Thomas watched her with calculating eyes. Consider my offer. I leave for Denver next week and would welcome your company as Mrs. Blackwood. Timothy would receive the best care available. Clara maintained her composure until she reached the ranch, where she found Ethan watching for her return, concern evident in his stance. You're late, he said, taking the packages from her arms. I was about to come looking for you. I encountered Thomas Blackwood, she admitted as they walked to the cabin. He's renewed his proposal. Ethan stopped abruptly. And he offers schools for Timothy in Denver, a fine house, respectability. Something shuddered in Ethan's expression. Sounds ideal for a woman in your position. My position? Stranded, dependent on charity. His tone grew harsh. Blackwood can provide what I cannot. I never asked for luxury, Clara protested, but you deserve more than this. Ethan gestured to the modest homestead. A proper life for you and Timothy, not the shadow of one. That's not for you to decide, Clara said heatedly. No, it's yours. Ethan's voice turned cold. And perhaps it's time you made it rather than prolonging this temporary arrangement. He strode toward the barn, leaving Clara fighting tears of frustration. That night, Clara couldn't sleep, replaying their argument. Ethan's sudden coldness felt like a betrayal after months of growing closeness. Did he truly want them to leave, or was he pushing her away from misguided nobility? The next morning, tension hung thick in the cabin as Clara prepared breakfast. Ethan ate quickly before announcing he needed to mend fences on the far pasture. Will you be back for dinner? Clara asked stiffly. Don't wait, Ethan replied without meeting her eyes. After he departed, Clara explained to Timothy that they needed to consider moving on when spring fully arrived. The boy's eyes widened in distress, his hands flying in the signals that had become their language. I know you like it here, Clara soothed. But Mr. Foster needs his home back. Timothy's signals grew more agitated as he pointed toward the barn, then made the sign for the injured colt. You can say goodbye to the colt before we go, Clara promised. Timothy shook his head vehemently, then grabbed her hand and pulled her toward the door. Outside, he pointed to the hills where dark clouds gathered, then to the creek that ran along the property's edge. Clara suddenly understood. The creek rises with spring rains. Timothy nodded urgently, then made Ethan's sign, followed by the motion for the distant pasture. You're worried about Ethan, Clara realized. He's working near the creek. Timothy tugged her toward the barn, clearly intending to fetch a horse. No, Timothy. It's too dangerous for you to go. Clara made a quick decision. Stay here, I'll find him. As she saddled the mare Ethan had taught her to ride, Clara glanced at the approaching storm. The dark clouds matched her sense of foreboding. She had just mounted when Timothy appeared with a bundle. I told you to stay, she scolded. Timothy pressed the bundle into her hands, Ethan's medical bag and extra bandages. Clara's throat tightened with emotion. You're right to think ahead, now stay inside until we return. She rode toward the far pasture, following the creek's winding path. The air grew heavy with impending rain, and Clara urged the mare faster. Something beyond the weather pushed her forward, a sense that this conflict with Ethan must be resolved before they could move forward in whatever direction that might be. The creek already ran swollen with melting snow from the mountains. Clara kept the mare on higher ground as she searched for signs of Ethan. The first fat raindrops began to fall as she spotted his horse tied to a distant tree. Thunder rumbled overhead as she approached. Ethan straightened from his work on the fence, surprise evident on his face. Clara, what are you doing out here? Before she could answer, a sound like a freight train roared from upstream. They both turned to see a wall of water surging down the creek bed, a flash flood triggered by the storm hitting already saturated ground upstream. Get to higher ground, Ethan shouted, already running for his horse. Clara turned her mare toward the slope, but the animal reared in panic as lightning cracked overhead. Clara tumbled from the saddle, landing hard on the muddy ground as the mare bolted. The last thing she saw before darkness claimed her was Ethan running toward her as the water rose around them. Clara awakened to pain and Ethan's voice, urgent against her ear. Rain pelted her face as strong arms lifted her. Stay with me, he commanded, carrying her up the muddy slope as water churned below. She glimpsed his horse, still tethered and panicking, before unconsciousness claimed her again. When she next opened her eyes, they were in a small line shack, a crude shelter for cowboys working distant pastures. Ethan bent over her, his soaked shirt clinging to his shoulders as he examined a gash on her forehead. Timothy, she gasped, trying to sit up. Safe at the house, Ethan assured her, gently pressing her back down. Creek between us is impassable now. We're trapped until the water recedes. Clara winced as he cleaned her wound. Your horse, grief flashed across his face. Lost him to the flood, couldn't save both of you. The implications sank in slowly through her pain. Ethan had chosen her over his valuable horse, possibly his only means of escape. Why did you come looking for me? He asked, applying a bandage with gentle precision. Timothy realized the danger. He was worried about you. Clara met his gaze. And I couldn't leave things as they were between us. Ethan's hands stilled. I said things I shouldn't have, because you believe them or because you're afraid. Thunder crashed outside, rattling the small window. Ethan moved to stoke the meager fire in the shack's small stove before answering. Both, he finally admitted. Blackwood can give you respectability, security, things I lost the right to offer anyone. That's not your decision to make, Clara said firmly, despite her throbbing head. I know what Thomas Blackwood is. His concern for Timothy is a facade to acquire your land. Ethan sat heavily on a stool beside her. Then why consider his offer at all? I never was, Clara confessed. But your reaction made me wonder if you wanted us gone. The silence between them filled with the sound of rain and rising wind. I want what's best for you, Ethan finally said, even if that means losing you. Clara reached for his hand, her fingers finding the ridged scar tissue that extended beneath his cuff. What if the best thing is a scarred doctor who's taught my brother to communicate and me to hope again? Ethan's eyes, usually so guarded, revealed a vulnerability that took her breath away. He leaned forward slowly, giving her time to retreat before his lips met hers with gentle certainty. They spent the night in the line shack, talking through secrets and fears as the storm raged. By morning, the rain had stopped, but the creek remained a torrent. Timothy will be frantic, Clara worried as Ethan checked her injuries. He's stronger than you realize, Ethan replied. And smarter, he'll know we're waiting out the flood. They were rescued mid-morning by Jacob Miller and his son, who had been checking for flood damage and spotted smoke from the shack. Your brother sent us, Miller explained as they rode double on his horses. Found him walking along the main road, signaling to everyone who passed. Boy's determined, I'll give him that. At the ranch, Timothy flew out the door as they approached, his hands moving so rapidly in their shared sign language that Clara could barely follow. "Slow down," she laughed, embracing him. "We're fine, just stranded by the flood." Timothy pulled back, his expressive face shifting from relief to confusion as he noticed the changed dynamic between Clara and Ethan. His hands formed a questioning pattern. Ethan smiled, a real smile that transformed his solemn face. "Yes, Timothy. Things are different now." Their peaceful reunion was interrupted 2 days later when Thomas Blackwood arrived, ostensibly to check on flood damage to neighboring properties. His calculating gaze took in Clara's bandaged forehead and Ethan's protective stance beside her. "Miss Lawson," he greeted her with forced cordiality. "I was concerned when you didn't return to town. I see you've had quite an adventure." "Mr. Blackwood," Clara acknowledged coolly. "As you can see, we've managed well enough." Thomas's eyes narrowed at her use of we. He turned to Ethan. "Foster, I've been meaning to discuss the south boundary line with you. My surveyors believe there may be some discrepancy in the original deed." Ethan crossed his arms. "Your surveyors are mistaken. My deed is clear." "Perhaps we should discuss this privately," Thomas suggested with a pointed glance at Clara. "Anything you have to say can be said in front of Clara," Ethan replied firmly. Thomas's veneer of civility cracked. "Very well. I intend to expand my operations. Your land is well situated for my purposes and I'm prepared to make a generous offer." "Not interested," Ethan said flatly. "Don't be hasty." Thomas's smile turned predatory. "I understand the authorities in Chicago might be interested to learn the whereabouts of Dr. Ethan Foster. There were questions about your failure to save your family, as I recall." Clara gasped, but Ethan's expression remained impassive. "There was an investigation. Was cleared of any wrongdoing." "Perhaps," Thomas conceded. "But scandal follows a man, especially one who abandoned his practice to hide in the wilderness. What would your neighbors think if they knew the full story?" "They already do." The new voice came from the doorway where Dr. Robert Warner, the town's physician, stood with Timothy. "I came to check on Miss Lawson," Warner explained, entering the cabin. "This young man fetched me from the road." Clara introduced the doctor, explaining his timely arrival. "Dr. Warner," Thomas acknowledged stiffly. "This is a private business matter. Concerning Dr. Foster's past in Chicago," Warner raised an eyebrow. "Hardly private, considering you've discussed it with several people in town, including me." Ethan looked startled. "You knew since you arrived," Warner confirmed. "We corresponded with the same medical journal years ago. I recognized your name, then your techniques when you set Miller's boy's arm last year. Yet you said nothing," Ethan said quietly. "Not my place," Warner shrugged. "But since Mr. Blackwood seems intent on using tragedy as leverage, I should mention that I've been wanting to propose a partnership. Willow Creek needs 2 doctors with the railroad coming through." Thomas's face flushed with anger. "This changes nothing. The land isn't for sale," Ethan finished firmly. "Not now, not ever." After Blackwood stormed out, Warner examined Clara's healing wound. "He'll try something else," the doctor warned. "Men like Blackwood don't surrender easily." "We'll be ready," Clara assured him, her hand finding Ethan's. Warner's prediction proved accurate. Within days, stories circulated about Ethan's past, twisted to suggest he had somehow been responsible for his family's deaths. Some townsfolk began to avoid him again when he visited the general store. Clara felt the renewed hostility keenly, but Ethan seemed almost relieved. "Living with secrets is its own prison," he told her. "At least now everything is in the open." True to his word, Warner offered Ethan a partnership in his growing practice. After initial hesitation, Ethan agreed to assist with specific cases, gradually returning to the profession he had abandoned. Clara, seeing Timothy's progress with the hand signals, approached the town's schoolteacher about establishing lessons for children with special needs. To her surprise, the teacher revealed her own brother was deaf and enthusiastically supported the initiative. Spring advanced into early summer. The garden flourished under Clara's care, and Timothy's rescued colt grew strong enough to bear weight on its healed leg. Inside the cabin, Ethan cleared space for Clara's books and Timothy's growing collection of carved animals. "We should discuss making this arrangement permanent," Ethan said one evening as they sat on the porch watching fireflies rise from the meadow grass. Clara smiled. "I thought we had. I mean properly." Ethan took her hand, his expression serious. "I want to adopt Timothy legally, and I want to marry you, Clara Lawson, if you'll have a scarred doctor who's only beginning to heal himself." Clara's answer was interrupted by the sound of approaching horses. Thomas Blackwood rode at the head of a small group of men, his face tight with determination. "Foster," he called out. "One last chance to sell willingly before I file my claim on this property." Ethan stood, positioning himself protectively in front of Clara. "Your claim is baseless, Blackwood." "We'll let the territorial court decide," Thomas sneered. "Meanwhile, I've brought witnesses to document any threatening behavior on your part." What happened next surprised everyone. The town doctor emerged from inside the cabin where he'd been sharing dinner with them. Behind him came Sheriff Davis and Jacob Miller. "Witnesses work both ways, Blackwood," the sheriff said mildly, "including to attempted intimidation and making false claims." Thomas's face darkened. "This isn't your concern, Davis." "Actually, it is." The sheriff patted his pocket. Got a wire from Chicago yesterday. Seems you've been representing yourself as a partner in a banking firm that's never heard of you. They're quite interested in speaking with you about funds you've been collecting in their name. The confrontation ended with Thomas Blackwood riding away under escort, his empire of lies collapsing around him. Later that night, with Timothy safely asleep, Clara and Ethan returned to the porch and the question that had been interrupted. The answer is yes, Clara said softly. With all my heart, yes. Ethan gathered her close, his scarred face illuminated by moonlight. I never thought I'd find hope again after Chicago. You and Timothy gave me back my future. And you gave us a home, Clara replied, when all we needed was shelter. The summer brought their wedding, a simple ceremony in the town church attended by their growing circle of friends. Timothy stood proudly beside them, signing his approval in the language Ethan had taught him. Dr. Warner gave Clara away, whispering, "You've healed the healer," as he placed her hand in Ethan's. 1 year later, Clara stood in the doorway of their expanded cabin, watching Ethan teach Timothy to train the once-injured colt, now a handsome yearling. Her hand rested on her swelling belly, where new life grew, tangible proof of love born from desperation and nurtured through the harshest winter. In town, Clara's special classroom had grown to include 5 children with various needs. Ethan divided his time between ranching and medical practice, his reputation restored through dedication and care. On the anniversary of their first meeting, they visited the small cemetery Ethan had established on a hillside overlooking the ranch. 2 markers bore the names of Rebecca and Hannah Foster. I'll always love them, Ethan said quietly. But they would want this, the happiness we've found together. Clara took his hand, understanding that some scars never fully healed but could still be part of something beautiful. The mail-order bride rejected for her brother and the doctor who couldn't save his family, she mused. Who would have thought we'd find redemption in each other? Timothy approached with wildflowers for the graves, his expressive face peaceful. He had begun to form a few spoken words, home being the first and clearest. Together, the unlikely family turned toward their cabin, where lamplight glowed welcome against the gathering dusk. Behind them, the last rays of sunset gilded the prairie grass, transforming the ordinary into gold, much as love had transformed their broken pieces into something whole and precious.